Reverend Dr. Kate Bruce. I know so much about her, I don't know how I'm going to introduce you, mate.
You know far too much, so shut up.
RAF chaplain, writer, stand-up comedian, dog owner. Kate's brilliant, very gifted speaker, and really good fun if ever you're around when she's doing stand-up comedy. We were having a joke earlier, and I'm tempted to say she's going to talk about men hanging around, but that's not what you're talking about, is it?
Talking about men hanging around?
In baskets.
Oh, in baskets, yeah. We may come across that.
We may come across that, right, yeah. Kate's spoken several times at Women's Voices, great supporter of this event, so it's great to have you with us again, Kate.
Thank you very much, Liz. Thanks. Thank you. Stay there. Yeah. Well, thank you. My topic is Rahab. So for most of the summer, I'd like to say I've been sitting calmly with the story of Rahab, but I haven't. I've been fighting with it, I've been arguing with it, and so I bring to you the fruit of the fight. Make of it what you will. But before we go any further, let's just have a bit of a collective, let's all get on board with, just shout out, what do you know about Rahab? What do you know about her story? Where are we with Rahab? Any image, any thought, anything, just chuck it out.
Baskets.
Baskets, yes. A couple of fellas in baskets. She lived in a house in the city walls, yeah, in the outside bit of the city wall, yeah, with a window.
She was a negotiator.
She was certainly a negotiator. She was canny, wasn't she? She was a shrewd woman. Anything else about her?
A risk taker.
She was, chuck out a risk.
Risk taker. Her own life was on the...
Her own life was on the line. She was a heck of a risk taker then, wasn't she? Wow, what a brave woman. What else do we know about her?
She was a well-connected woman who lived in the gateway in the wall, and she was more or less a spy. She was a prostitute, but she was a woman who sort of looked after all of her family as well, didn't she? She negotiated the safety of her family as well as herself, but she also would have known the king and all of the courtiers and everybody who came in and out of the city. Was it Jericho? So, yeah, she was well connected, she was well known, and...
So she's a well-connected, well-known wheeler-dealer, looks after her family, is clearly the head of the household, is a prostitute, she's known as Rahab the harlot. The king seems to know where she hangs out. Interesting. Brilliant. Anything else?
Mother, grandmother and great-grandmother.
Okay, yeah, so something of a matriarch here, yeah? Anything else? Well, let's go to the biblical text and let's have a reminder. If you've got access to a Bible, I hope you have, join with me. Let's read Joshua 2, 1 to 21, and then there's a bit more of her story in chapter 6. Sorry about the dog. Joshua, we're in Joshua chapter 2. From verse 1. Then Joshua, son of Nun, sent 2 men secretly from Shittim. Every small child in the room sniggers at that, don't they? Well, a small child in me does. From Shittim as spies, saying, "Go view the land, especially Jericho." So they went and entered the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and spent the night there. Nudge, nudge. Wink, wink. I can't read this story without interspersing it with little comments, so that's going to happen all the way through. Interesting, they don't get very far, do they, given that they're on a mission to spy out the land. Anyway, the king of Jericho was told, "Some Israelites have come here tonight to search out the land." They're not going to do a lot of searching out of the land from there, but maybe they'll get good gen. Maybe lots of people come to this place. Interesting. Then the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab, "Bring out the men who have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come only to search out the whole land." They haven't made a very good start, have they?
She knew everybody.
They knew everybody, so it was probably a good place to get good information. But the woman took the 2 men and hid them. Then she said, "True, the men came to me, but I don't know where they're from. And when it was time to close the gate at dark, the men went out. Where the men went, I do not know. Pursue them quickly, for you can overtake them. It's at this point in reading the text that I keep hearing the Benny Hill music. For those of you, it starts to read. I know it's very serious, but so is comedy. To me, it starts to read like a comedy. And off they go over there. Meanwhile, they're hidden up in the roof space. Yes, so the men pursued them on their way to the Jordan as far as the fords. As soon as the pursuers had gone, the gate was shut. Ooh, the irony. The gate was shut with the spies inside the city. Before they went to sleep, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I just need to remind you at this point that this is she's a Gentile woman, she's a prostitute, she's the outsider, the Canaanite, and she says this, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that dread of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt in fear before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites that were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. As soon as we heard it, our hearts failed, and there was no courage left in any of us because of you. The Lord your God is indeed God in heaven above and on earth below. Drop the mic. That's not in the Bible. Now then, since I have dealt kindly with you, swear to me by the Lord that you in turn will deal kindly with my family. Give me a sign of good faith that you will spare my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. The men said to her, our life for yours. If you do not tell the business of ours, then we will deal kindly and faithfully with you when the Lord gives us the land. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the outer side of the city wall, and she resided within the wall herself. She said to them, go towards the hill country, so that the pursuers may not come upon you. Benny Hill music piping up in the background. Hide yourselves there for 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Then afterwards you may go on your way. The men said to her, we will be released from this oath that you have made us swear to you. If we invade the land and you do not tie this crimson cord in the window through which you let us down, and you do not gather into your house, your father, your mother's, and on the text goes as they start to negotiate back with her. Where are they while they're doing this negotiation? They're in a basket dangling from a wall. I can't help but smile. I'm not going to dwell in what their negotiation is because my focus isn't particularly on them. Interesting story, isn't it? So they go off on their way, directed where to go by Rahab, and then we can jump to chapter 6, to verse 22. If you remember the story, the walls have collapsed, and the capture of the city is about to happen. And Joshua said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, go into the prostitute's house and bring the woman out of it and all who belong to her, as you swore to her. So the young men who'd been spies went in and brought Rahab out, along with her father, her mother, her brothers, and all who belonged to her. That's a lovely phrase. Well, we could spend a while just unpacking. What does that mean? Who's this group of people who have gathered around this incredibly powerful woman and who she's saved? And they brought all her kindred out and set them outside the camp. They burned down the city and everything in it. Only the silver and gold and the vessels of bronze and iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. But Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, there's that phrase again, Joshua spared. Her family has lived in Israel ever since, for she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent out to spy out Jericho. Well, I tell you what, I've had a right old ding-dong with this text and a lot of fun with it. reading, somebody over here said something a minute ago about it. Somebody said it's about who you stand with. How you read a text depends where you stand, has been made very, very clear this morning. So how do we read Rahab? Well, it depends where you stand. If you read the text, at least with the sound of Benny Hill in the background, you see a heroine. She's at the centre of this story. The text is really clear, and we'll unpack that. You know, she's the one directing events. You go that way, I'll get you from up there, I'll let you out through a window. Imagine reading this story as one who is an outsider. The woman, the prostitute, the outsider, the Gentile, the one whose face doesn't fit. You're going to be applauding. Look at her. She's in the centre of the story, controlling events, and there's a kind of comedy around this, very serious comedy. There's a joyousness about what's going on here, that she is the master manipulator. She is the one who tells the king where to send his men. Remarkable. So is she the heroine at the centre of the story? Interesting. What about reading what she actually says? That blows your mind when you start to think about, where have I heard words like that before? So let's look at her words for a moment. She says in Joshua 2 verse 9, I know that the Lord has given you the land. Right. That's interesting. How do you know that, Rahab? Are you a woman of faith? Are you a liar and an arch manipulator? Are you buttering your own bread the right way to save your own people? Leave the questions hanging. But where have you heard language like that before? Joshua 1 verse 2. God says, proceed to cross the Jordan, you and all the people, into the land that I am giving. Rahab, I know that the Lord has given you the land. Rahab appears to be endorsing the word of God. God said this, and this is what I see. Interesting. What else does she say? Rahab, why have I done this at point 8? I've no idea. Rahab says, dread of you has fallen on us. All the inhabitants of the land melt in fear before you. That's Joshua 2:9. Moses, in Exodus 15, says, trembling seized the leaders of Moab, of the inhabitants of Canaan, they melted away. Interesting, isn't it? There are echoes here. We have a woman, an outsider, a Canaanite of all people, echoing the words of Moses, the leader of the people. Then we find in verse, again it's in Joshua 2, Rahab, when the people heard about the Red Sea being dried up and the fate of the Amorite kings Sihon and Og, quote, our hearts failed, there was no courage left in any of us. Exodus 14, when the Israelites saw God's work amongst the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord. So, Rahab fears God. Not her God, but she recognises and fears. And then finally, one that I was staggered when I picked up the resonance of this. If you go to Deuteronomy 4 and read the words of Moses, Moses says, this is verse 39, acknowledge today and take to heart that the Lord is God in heaven above and on the earth beneath. There is no other. Okay, that's Moses. Solomon, 1 Kings, states, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth or on the earth beneath. Okay, so we've got Moses, Solomon, God's great, there's no one else like him. Yeah? Rahab, the Lord your God is indeed God in heaven above and on the earth below. Rahab, Moses, Solomon. It's not a trinity we often hear put together. They're not 3 characters we often hear put together, but the language is clear. Something is afoot here. So, how do we read Rahab? She's the comic heroine in the beginning of the story, in this story, who is subversive and a mark of hope, a mark of joy, and there is a certain smile at the way that she just conducts everything. Why on earth is she doing this? And yet she is. Then we read that she is actually a true Israelite in her faith and action. Look at her speech. And then compare it to the behaviour of the people of Israel as they're wandering round in the desert. Oh no, Oh, this is shocking. Do you remember how good it was when we were... Remember the melons? Remember how good it was back in Egypt? Well, hardly faithful, is it? Or, oh, look, the promised land. Oh, let's not go there. The people are really big. Let's stay over here. Rahab behaves like a true Israelite. Weird. And there we have it. So how you read her depends on where you stand. She is a heathen, a woman, and a sex worker. She is the triple outsider from the point of view of Israel. Let me just find my bit of the text. The triple outsider, yeah, that's it. From an Israelite perspective then, Rahab is unclean. Yet she acts with more faith than many in Israel who doubted and rebelled as they wandered through the wilderness. She seems closer to Yahweh than Yahweh's own people. So just who is the true Israelite? Let me just read this little bit here to you. The story of Rahab. Rahab is a woman of remarkable faith. Her first words to the spies are, "I know the Lord has given you the land." It's a knowing that informs her behaviour. She's at the centre of the action. She manages the hapless, bumbling spies. She misdirects the suspicious king. The two spies sent by Joshua get no further than the local brothel, which I can't help but think maybe there's a nudge, nudge, wink, wink situation operating here. But their whereabouts are known immediately to the king. They're not very good at what they're doing. It's not exactly a covert operation. The plan of the bumbling stooges is thwarted before it even begins. We witness dramatic action and comedic misdirection, and there are more serious themes at work. The story of Rahab, I think, demonstrates subversion and the dissenting voice. And that dissenting voice is brave and faithful. As with Mary in the New Testament, God looks with favour at the lowliness of his servant, uses the weak to shame the strong. Imagine reading that as somebody marginalised, subjugated and depressed. There's entertainment to be had here, but more importantly, there's great hope, because Rahab and Yahweh are presented as being on the same team, which is remarkable in this text. So where do we stand? Well, you could say, right, so she's the heroine at the centre of you could read it that way, like I've just read it. You could read it, she's the true Israelite. You could read it from the Israelite perspective. She's the heathen, the Canaanite woman, the sex worker, the triple outsider. But what if you're, this is where I really struggled. I sat with this for ages. What if you're a Canaanite? How do you read Rahab if you're a Canaanite? I would suggest you read the character of Rahab with a certain degree of rage, because she's the fifth columnist. She's the betrayer. She's treacherous and treasonous. She's in league with the coming oppressor. But then I found myself saying, well, is there any surprise that Rahab lacks loyalty to you, to this nation? Think about her position amongst these people. She lives in the city wall. She is literally pushed from the centre to the edges. But they all know about her. She's used, she's tolerated by society, but pushed to the edges. We all know Rahab, don't we? And maybe I found myself thinking, if you're the one pushed to the edges, you're in a much better position to recognise the truth. Anybody in the land of Canaan could have recognised what Rahab recognised, but they didn't. But she did. She's a survivor. She's quick-witted. She recognises that perhaps that status quo over there is not my status quo, and I'm going to look after my people. Brings us back. Who are these people? There are blood relatives. She is, mother, grandmother, sister, all of that. They're her blood relatives, but there's a whole other team of people. It's not in the text. How did these people come into her life? And who are they? And why is she so invested in saving them, these nameless people? Another person might have gone, well, you lot can bugger off. I'm taking my mum and I'm off. We tend to be more loyal sometimes, perhaps, to blood relatives. Suggestion. Not Rahab. Who are these people? Where have they come from? How have they come under her wing into her household? What is the business of her household? Is she not forced, exactly what you said at the beginning, to use bodies to make money to survive? Is that what's going on here? She's such an intriguing character, and although I tried to give the Canaanite critique a few moments, I didn't sit with them for very long. If she wasn't loyal to you, there might have been a very, very good reason. But that's a perspective. She is, from their point of view, the fifth columnist, the despised traitor. But put yourself in that group of nameless people who are part of her tribe. I can't help but do that because it feels like that she gathers them into her. Put yourself there. What's your backstory? How did you end up here in this house under the protection of this woman? What did she see in you that made her know that she needed a place at your table? What have you experienced that Rahab understood? Rahab knows the darkness that you spoke of, I think. Eve, sorry, you. I think Rahab knows what it means to be the outsider. I think she knows full well that there is no joy until you sit in the pain. And I think Rahab, this is the way I'm reading the text now. I think Rahab's a survivor. I think she knows what it is to be a survivor. I think she's made space at her table for survivors, and she's known to them too. The powerful people know, but these people do too. And I'm so struck by the fact she doesn't run out on them. She could have just saved the little nuclear family. I know I'm reading back into the text, the concept is not there, but do you know what I mean? She could have saved just these people, but she negotiates for all of them. Fascinating. I just lost my place. Give it a minute. She asks the spies that the kindness that she shows to the spies is reciprocated. And if you look at the text, the Hebrew word that is used for kindness is chesed, which you will know is often used to describe the merciful, loving kindness of God. I love that. This Rahab, this woman, this survivor, this prostitute, this Canaanite, her actions echo a divine characteristic. She marks her family and those in her care for rescue. And I love that symbol of the red thread hanging out of the window. Now, the red thread is brought up by the men in the basket. You use this red thread. Who picked up a red? Where was the red thread? This red thread that you could see if you threw it out of a window because it was obvious. Oh, I've got a song in my mind. Roxanne. You don't have to put... You remember the song? I think the red thread is a symbol out of the window to say we're open and we're here. And I think one of those fellas says, that's the red thread that will be the sign for us. Make sure it's hanging out the window. But there's an aside. Although it is interesting, isn't it, when you just let the Bible play games and echo around. Red threads, red marks, signs on doorways. Suddenly. Hang on a minute, have we got a connection here between the blood that splashed on a doorway and a red thread used to signify prostitution? And both symbols are about people being saved. I sat a long time with Rahab and I had a lot of fun with it, but it did fry my head a bit. Some of the echoes and the layers. You could see Rahab as simply recognising the power of the invaders coming over the hill and throwing in her lot with them to save her skin. But I think that's too simple and I think it's too cynical. I think Rahab recognises Yahweh and responds appropriately when no one else in Canaan does. And maybe the ones with eyes to see and recognising God afoot are those who have been to some dark places, and I think Rahab has. I think she recognises the goodness of God. And she risks everything because of her faith that God is at work. And her people are delivered from death. So Rahab, if you're there, her people or her family, who is she? She's a saviour. How fitting then that Rahab is in the genealogy in Matthew 1 as one of Jesus's great grannies. It's brilliant, isn't it? You know, along with, who else is there? Bathsheba, who's not named, but she's the wife of Uriah.
Tamar, who I'm doing later on.
Tamar, who you're doing later on, and there's one other.
Ruth.
And Ruth, of course. Yeah, interesting that these women are in the backstory of Jesus' own family. But I just wanted to draw your attention to something in the second bit of the text that I read out. I want you to think about, there's two verses, Joshua 6:24 and Joshua 6:25. And I want to suggest that for a minute we put Joshua 6:24 there and Joshua 6:25 there. And just wrestle a bit with what's going on. So if you remember, I read it out, the city's been taken, and Joshua, good to his word, reminds the spies, oi, do what you said you were going to do. So 6:24, let me just find the text. No, it's not 6:24, it's 6:23. So the young men who had been spies, brackets not very good ones, went in and brought Rahab out, along with her father, her mother, her brothers, and all who belonged to her. They brought all of her kindred out, and they set them outside the camp of Israel. So that's Joshua 6:23. This crew of people are outside the camp of Israel. Okay. Then we read into the next verse, blah, 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 verse 25 it is. So it's 23 and 25. Rahab the prostitute, with her family and all who belonged to her, Joshua spared. Her family's lived in Israel ever since. Oh, hang on a minute. Whoa. Just stop there. There they all are outside the camp of Israel. But they lived in Israel ever since. I want to suggest that between that verse and that verse, there was an almighty row. It's just, I mean, I'm standing here, I'm a person, I'm an Israelite, yeah? That is a woman, that is a Canaanite woman prostitute with all of her little imps and all of her gang and all of her unclean, filthy tribe, and you want them here with my people? I don't think so. Can you imagine if back in the day they'd had Twitter? I'm telling you now, Rahab out would have been trending on Twitter, wouldn't it? We're not having her. She's not. What are we supposed to do with that? You can hear it. You can hear the rage, the prejudice, the fury. How on earth does that feel if you stand here? My boots keep catching my trousers, and Liz keeps saying that you're what? What do you call me? What are the...
A mason.
A mason. I said, I'm not a mason because I haven't bared my left breast. I'm not going to do that. But how does it, if you're here, what does that feel like? You know? And actually, once you've got yourself over here, what does it feel like? Is this all cosy and nice? No. Some people will get you. Some people will love you. Some people will make space around the table. Some people will shut the door in your face. And yet, there's Rahab in Matthew 1. It's brilliant, isn't it? A brilliant, brilliant story. I'm sure I've got a bit more. Yeah. What we've got to say then, of course, is how do we preach it? Well, it almost preaches itself in some ways. My wrestling match has been, which direction do you go in? But I think for me, the hashtag is Rahab in. I think that's my sermon really, Rahab in. Because Rahab's story hints at a new possibility, doesn't it? Not an easy possibility, but it hints at something, a new Israel that breaks apart the old oppositions. a new community which is changed by the inclusion of the outsider. I think that was very uncomfortable, that inclusion, for Rahab and for her people, and for many of others who are having to get their heads around it, a new way of being. But there's hope here. The old oppositions are broken apart by the inclusion of that outsider. I can start to hear other verses just bubbling away. Many will come from east and west and sit and eat. In this story, as with so many, we see how God works in and through people that we might write off as beyond the pale. If I was sitting in Israel, I would have written her off. Fact. If I was sitting with the powerful, I probably would have done that. I probably wouldn't have seen it. The thing is, people rarely, if ever, fit into neat and tidy categories. And if they do, there's a high chance that a big portion of their truth has been airbrushed out. Rahab's story strongly suggests that when I decide who is and who is not of the people of God, that God probably disagrees with me. Hashtag all are welcome. Faith is not the sole possession, brackets, sometimes it may not even be the possession, of those of us who see ourselves as in. Rahab is like the centurion of whom Jesus said, "In no one in Israel have I found such faith." Jesus is clear. Many will come from east and west and sit with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. That's a beautiful picture, isn't it, of inclusion. But let's not airbrush out the rest of that text. Jesus continues, "While the heirs of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." The danger of the insider-outsider thinking is the risk of being named as the outsider, on the wrong side of the door. Nobody wants that. But how thoughtlessly we place other people there. So I want to say that Rahab's story invites us into the ring. You want to wrestle with it? Well, you're in the ring and you're going to get thrown about on the ropes with this story. Because it says to us, what about a more thoughtful, a less judgmental, a more loving and inclusive stance? What about being a bit more open to unexpected possibility? What about that inclusive thinking that is humble and merciful and kind and seeks out the whole person, the whole truth, just as God seeks out our whole truth? This is a story that faces the messiness of humanity and resists a rush to neat conclusions. It's a story that says, soften your hardened attitude. Make space for the other. Recognise that you too, me too, I am the other. So often, those of us who, for all kinds of reasons, hold power and positions and access to microphones, think the other is over there. But I am the other. And I am included too. Do we have a willingness to be surprised, to be open to the voices that initially, because of our stories, our backgrounds, our all of that stuff, we might want to shut out or close down or silence? People are very rarely straightforward. I'm not. Are you? That's where I ended up with the story of Rahab. All of us benefit from God's invitation into radical inclusion. We're all outsiders. Some are more outsiders than others. And so I'm left challenged with, when I wrestle with this in my own life, who have I put out there in that verse? Who have I pushed over there? Who have I said, not a chance? And where those people have come into worlds that I inhabit are the people that I go, nah, thanks. Yeah, there are. And what am I going to do about it? That's what this story does. I think it's a brilliant story and I heartily commend it to you. Yeah, so that's me, I'm done. That was a tidy ending, wasn't it?